Hello and welcome back to my F1 retrospective series. In the last episode, we covered the story of F1's first season and the three-way title fight between the dominant Alfa Romeo drivers that saw Giuseppe Farina become the sport's first ever champion at the final race in Monza. The main question going into 951 was whether another team could challenge the Alfa Romeos or even topple them altogether. The obvious candidate for this would be the Ferrari boys. They had a new car and had retained both Ascari and Villoresi, and they had also recruited the Italian Piero Taruffi and the Argentine Jose Frolian Gonzalez, driving in selective races. There were 7 races, excluding Indy, in the season to find out who would come out on top. The point system remained the same as last year, being awarded on an 8, 6, 4, 3, 2 basis with an extra point for fastest lap. Due to the absence of Monaco from the calendar, the first race of the season was to take place at the Bremgarten circuit in Switzerland, and any hope of the Alfa Romeo juggernaut being slowed seemed foolish as they immediately took 4 of the top 5 positions in qualifying. Fangio took pole ahead of reigning champion Farina. Villoresi managed to get up to 3rd and split the Alfa Romeos. The Ferraris had also managed to pull clear of the Tabulagos, leaving them in midfield obscurity. Come race day, the rain came, and as Fangio stormed off into the lead ahead of Farina, while the Fangio of Taruffi rose up as a challenger, on lap 24, Fangio had to make a pit stop, handing the lead to Farina. Farina had elected not to make a pit stop, and this was a gamble that unfortunately did not pay off, as Fangio later repassed him for the lead, and then on the penultimate lap he was repassed by the Ferrari of Taruffi. So Fangio took victory by nearly a minute ahead of Taruffi and Farina, and the Alphas of Consalvo Zanesi and Tuello de Graffenried finished 4th and 5th respectively. Oh yeah, and just like last time we won't be talking about Indy, because it was a pointless addition to the calendar. Just like last season, the Belgian Grand Prix at Spa-Francorchamps didn't attract many entrants with a grid size of only 13 cars. Still attracted a record crowd, however. In qualifying, Fangio put it on pole, 3 whole seconds ahead of Farina in second. Just Fangio things. Next were the 3 Ferraris of Villoresi, Ascari and Taruffi in that order, followed by Zanesi in the 3rd Alpha and then a swarm of Tabulagos. On race day, Ferrari looked to have a chance as Villoresi initially led the race. However, he was quickly passed by Farina. Fangio then took the lead from Farina shortly before he made his pit stop. However, at this pit stop, his race would come undone. See, Fangio had been given some special suspension upgrades and special wheels to boot. These wheels had to be made concave, otherwise they wouldn't have fit over the brake drums. At this pit stop, these new wheels proved to be an expensive novelty as they jammed, and as a result, his stop lasted a whole 14 minutes. This led Farina to dominate and come home to take a win ahead of the Ferraris of Ascari and Villoresi. Due to mechanical problems for the other Alphas and Ferraris, the outdated Tabulagos of Louis Rosier and Yves Jean Cabantus managed to get themselves into the points, finishing 4th and 5th respectively. Fangio would eventually finish 4 laps down in 9th place due to his pit stop calamity. However, he did still claim the bonus point for fastest lap. This result meant that Farina now led Fangio at the top of the table by 12 points to 10. The Alphas continued their dominance in qualifying as Fangio and Farina took a 1-2 on the grid, this making it Fangio's 3rd pole on the bounce. Meanwhile, the Ferraris of Ascari and Villoresi lined up 3rd and 4th respectively. Our 3rd character in this title fight from last season also made an appearance. Luigi Fagioli lined up in 7th. Oh boy, race day. This one gets a bit complicated because it involves lots of shared drives, so I'll do my best to explain. Ascari and Fangio initially battled for the lead, however around lap 10 both ran into mechanical problems. Ascari's gearbox failed and he retired from the race. He then took over the car of his teammate Gonzalez. Fangio's car meanwhile had developed a misfire, so he came into the pits to have his magneto replaced. However, he came back in the very next lap complaining that the problem still wasn't fixed. This was bad. Fangio couldn't afford to have wins slip through his fingers like this. On lap 20, Fagioli and one of the other Alphas came into his fuel stop, and since the car was running faultlessly compared to Fangio's half-broken one, the team ordered that the 2 drivers swap cars. Fagioli was enraged, but complied, and so Fangio was able to rejoin the race while Fagioli had to try and nurse a heap of junk across the line. Fangio would eventually make his way back through the field to win, aided by problems for the Ferraris ahead of him. Ascari, in Gonzalez's original car, would finish 2nd, followed by Villoresi in 3rd. Reg Parnell in 4th and Farina in 5th. Fagioli would eventually finish 11th, 22 laps down. Now, if you remember from last time, a shared drive would result in both drivers getting credit for the result and points being split evenly between them. So as such, the official classification looked like this. What a mess. Since Fagioli got credit for the win, it actually made him F1's oldest ever race winner at the time, 53 years old. To put that into context, he was born in the 1800s. He's the only F1 winner ever to have been so. That didn't really matter much to Luigi, however, as he was angry. This was ridiculous. He was a veteran racer that had been racing cars since the 20s, and was known for having quite a temper. In fact, he was so furious about being ordered to step aside for Fangio that after that race he quit Grand Prix racing on the spot. His sacrifice, however, did mean that Fangio reclaimed the lead of the championship, as Farina's poor result meant that he couldn't capitalise on Fangio's halved points total. When the F1 circus arrived in Silverstone for the British Grand Prix, there was an Argentine on pole once again, but it wasn't Fangio. It was a Ferrari of Jose Frolin Gonzalez, the first pole for both driver and team, and, in a display of Alfa Romeo's utter dominance up to this point, the first non-Alfa pole in F1 history. Well, outside of the Indy 500, of course, but we aren't counting them. Fangio lined up second, followed by Farina, Ascari, Vioresi, Senesi, and the fourth Alfa entry driven by Felice Bonotto. A new team entered this race, the BRM team, running two cars with an unconventional V16 engine. The team had turned up at the last minute and hadn't done any practice or qualifying, hence they would start the race at the back. On race day, the Alfas and Ferraris all got off the line well, and of all people it was Bonetto who was the first man into the first corner. However, his lead was short-lived and Gonzalez passed him going into lap 2. His Alfa Romeo teammates Fangio and Farina swiftly followed suit. Astonishingly, the two BRMs were actually still in pursuit of the leaders at this point, despite starting at the back of the field. On lap 6, Fangio began to close in on Gonzalez, and by lap 10 he would pass him. It looked as though Fangio was going to run away with it. However, the race would expose the Alfa Romeo's main weakness. It may have been fast, but its fuel consumption was abysmal. It just drank fuel. They were averaging a measly 1.5 miles per gallon, and they only had a 70-gallon fuel tank. This meant they could only do 105 miles on a full tank before they would have to stop to refuel. The British Grand Prix had a total distance of just over 250 miles. This meant the Alfa Romeos had no choice but to stop twice for fuel, and given that F1 1950's pit stops were measured in minutes as opposed to seconds, you could tell they were going to have a bad time. Gonzalez, however, in his much more fuel-efficient Ferrari, only had to stop once. This meant that when he took the lead from Fangio going into Beckett's corner on lap 39, he stayed there for the rest of the race. Farina, meanwhile, was experiencing a case of bad news and worse news. The bad news was that his clutch was slipping. The worst news was that his engine was on fire, so wisely he decided best to call it a day. When all was said and done, Gonzalez came across the line to take his and Ferrari's first F1 win. Nearly a minute ahead of Fangio in second, while Farina's problems were to the benefit of Vioresi, who inherited third place, while fourth went to the Alfa of Bonetto. Meanwhile, Reg Parnell in one of the BRMs battled on despite burnt hands and feet to finish fifth, and ensure that the team scored points on debut. Farina did at least manage to come away from this event with something, as he had set the fastest lap of the race prior to his engine failure. This result meant that Fangio's lead at the top of the table was now 6 points ahead of Farina, with Gonzalez's win catapulting him up the table. The next race was to take place in Germany, at a circuit built in the Eifel Mountains. But this wasn't just any old circuit. No, this was something else. For the non-motorsport fans out there is a few select circuits that hold a special place in the heart of petrolheads, whose tarmac is almost sacred. You've got Spa, Monza, Bathurst, Le Mans, Indianapolis, and this place, the Nürburgring, aka the Green Hell. But why is it called that? Well, perhaps the ring deserves its own video at some point, but for now I'll just sum it up by saying it was like Spa, only longer, and even more of a death trap. Both Alfa Romeo and Ferrari fielded largely the same four-car lineup. The only change was that Alfa of Senesi was taken over by local driver Paul Pietsch, who, fun fact, was the guy who founded Das Auto, one of Germany's leading car mags. He lined up 7th on his debut, while Ascari and Gonzalez made it a Ferrari 1-2, showing that Silverstone was no fluke. Fangio and Farina were down in 3rd and 4th, over 3 seconds behind the Ferraris. Race day in the Eifel Mountains. Farina initially went into the lead, followed by Fangio and the 2 Ferraris. However, all 3 quickly repassed him. Fangio led, and the Alfa appeared to have good race pace, but the exact same problem as at Silverstone was about to strike again. The car's awful fuel consumption. Once again, the Alfas would need to stop twice. The Ferraris would only need to stop once. Fangio made his first stop on lap 4, handing the lead to Ascari. On lap 8, Farina would retire with overheating problems, leaving Fangio to be the only remaining challenger to the Ferraris. He would eventually retake the lead once both Ferraris had made their pit stops on lap 11. Now he needed to push. If he was going to keep the lead, he needed to pull out a far ahead in order to account for his second pit stop, and he couldn't do it. It was impossible even for him. Ascari took back the lead on lap 14 when Fangio stopped. Fangio couldn't even fight back due to his car's gearbox having a hissy fit and only allowing him to have third and fourth gears. So as a result, Ascari would go on to take his first ever F1 victory by over half a minute. Gonzalez would complete the podium. The Ferraris of Vioresi and Taruffi would round out the point scorers. This result meant that the Ferraris of Ascari and Gonzalez jumped up to second and third, while Ascari closed the gap to Fangio to just 10 points with 2 races to go. Perhaps the title battle was on. Arriving at Monza for the penultimate round of the season, Tuolo de Grafenried returned to the Alfa Romeo lineup alongside regular drivers Farina, Fangio and Bonetto. Meanwhile, Ferrari retained the same lineup as at the Nürburgring. Fangio took pole with Farina just behind him, making it an Alfa Romeo 1-2. The 4 Ferraris followed, Ascari, Gonzalez, Vioresi and Taruffi in that order. Bonetto lined up in 7th, while the 4th Alfa de Grafenried was in 9th. Reg Parnell in the BRM would split them, however he wouldn't go on to start the race due to lubrication issues. Grow up. On race day, Fangio led off the line before engaging in a battle for the lead with Ascari. On lap 13, Fangio had to pit for a new tyre, causing him to drop to 5th. In the early laps of the race, both Farina and de Grafenried retired. This left Gonzalez running 2nd with Fangio 3rd. Fangio attempted to bridge the gap to the Ferraris, however his engine didn't like this very much and it got back at him by braking. Around this time, Farina had taken over Bonetto's car. Because Bonetto was a good boy compared to Fagioli, after Fangio's blown engine, Farina had inherited 3rd place. Farina was quick and therefore was looking like a danger to the Ferraris. However, due to fuel leakage problems, his already awful fuel consumption was made even worse, causing him to have to make 2 extra fuel stops, meaning that he had to settle for 3rd while Ascari crossed the line to win ahead of teammate Gonzalez. Vioresi and Taruffi made it so that the Scuderia took up 4 of the first 5 point-scoring positions. This result meant that going into the final round, 3 drivers had a shot at the title, although Gonzalez's chances were pretty slim. Fangio and Ascari, however, were separated by only 2 points. This race was going to be a race defined by engineering choices. Ferrari were using a 16-inch rear wheel, while Alfa Romeo went for an 18-inch one. Race day would reveal who had made the right decision, and decide which way the title would swing. The 3 title contenders lined up 1, 2, 3 on the grid, with Ascari on pole, followed by Fangio and Gonzalez. There were many variables at play, but Ascari knew that if he was going to win the title, he had to finish ahead of Fangio, and Fangio knew that if he finished either first or second, then the title was his and there was nothing Ascari could do about it. Meanwhile, Gonzalez probably just sat there and hoped that the other 2 would take each other out, allowing him to poach the title from under their noses. On race day, all of Maranello probably collectively cheered as Ascari and Gonzalez both jumped Fangio off the line, but soon all their hearts would sink again, as it would become clear that which team had made the correct wheel choice. The Ferraris were tearing their tyres to shreds. All of them threw treads within the first 15 laps of the race and were forced to stop for new ones. They had to frequently stop throughout the race because of this problem, meaning that they couldn't use their car's greater fuel efficiency to beat the Alfas. The Alfas, meanwhile, had made the right choice, and Fangio had no such problems. This meant that Fangio won the race comfortably ahead of Gonzalez, with Farina in 3rd, while Ascari came in 4th and the Alfa of Bonetto in 5th. All this meant that Fangio had withstood the Ferrari challenge to take his first title by 6 points ahead of Ascari. And yes, I know, lots of numbers in brackets. Go watch the first video if you want to know how this rule worked out. But for now, just know the rule was dumb, so therefore I'm not going to give it any more time. It simply isn't deserving of it. As a whole, this actually was a pretty good season, which was a surprise to me. I'd always been led to believe that Fangio was so dominant that he'd won all his titles like it was child's play. So researching this one was a bit of a breath of fresh air. I put the season in B tier, bordering on A tier, honestly. After the Spanish Grand Prix, the Alfa Romeo announced that due to lack of finances, they would not be competing in the 1952 season. Bit of me wonders if that was truly the whole reason, though, as this season had laid bare the weaknesses of the 159's design, and it was clear that the once dominant car was now starting to show its age. It was a pre-war design, an old-timer, ready to be replaced. However, that would be expensive. Too expensive, so it was easy just to withdraw from the sport entirely. All of this presented some questions. With Alfa gone, would Ferrari just be left to dominate, much like Alfa had in 1950? Or would a new team join that would take the challenge to Ferrari? Join me next time and find out.